By the time I pushed out of the glass tower on Market Street, my hands were still cramped from typing, and my email still smelled like disappointment. The client had thanked me with a smile and a promise to pay, the kind that always arrived late and always arrived smaller than the invoice. Rain misted the sidewalk, turning headlights into smeared coins. I tightened my thrift store coat and did the math I always did. Rent, daycare, Nana Ruth's prescriptions, Ellie's school pictures, groceries, gas, and whatever surprise the week planned to throw at us before I even reached home. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a string of messages from Maya that I could not answer, and a missed call from Nana Ruth that made my stomach tighten. Ellie would be half asleep by now, clutching her stuffed rabbit, waiting for my key in the door. I pictured her lunchbox on the counter, the note I had promised to write, the permission slip due tomorrow. I should have been thinking about Portuguese clauses and payment terms, but motherhood does not pause for contracts. The crosswalk sign across the street started flashing, and I stepped toward it without looking up. Traffic was thin, just delivery vans and late ride shares gliding through puddles. I watched the white walking symbol, waited for it to hold steady, and let my mind jump ahead to Ellie's morning. Then, from the opposite corner, a man in a dark suit stepped off the curb like the street belonged to him. He moved fast, eyes fixed on something in his hand, jaw set in concentration. Everything about him said expensive, controlled, untouchable. I remember thinking he was about to learn a brutal lesson from Philadelphia drivers, and then I saw the truck coming too hard, too wrong. It should have been slowing. The light above it burned red, clear as a warning flare, but the grille kept growing, swallowing the lane. My brain tried to name options, but my body made the choice first. I dropped my bag and sprinted, shoes skidding on wet paint. I reached him at the exact moment the truck entered the intersection. I slammed both palms into his chest and shoved with everything I had, a desperate, ugly force. We went down together, hard, and he twisted so my head did not crack the pavement like he knew how to fall cleanly. Sound shattered into pieces, tires hissing, metal roaring, my own breath scraping out of me. My right wrist bent under our weight, and pain flared bright enough to steal color from the world. The truck missed us by inches, close enough that its wind slapped my face and sprayed gritty water into my eyes. But as it passed, I saw the front end dip, not away from us, but toward us, a tiny correction like a hunter adjusting aim. The driver did not panic. The driver committed, and then the taillights vanished into rain and my stomach went cold again. For a second, everything was too quiet, like the city held its breath. The man's arm was around my shoulders, not gentle, just instinctive, as if he had decided I was not allowed to be crushed. I could feel his heartbeat through expensive fabric, steady and heavy. I pushed up with my good hand and tasted blood where I had bitten my cheek. My knee burned, my wrist throbbed, and I thought of Ellie's small fingers in mine. I waited for sirens. None came. I waited for shouted questions. Only rain answered. The streetlights trembled in every puddle around us. My bag lay in the crosswalk like a burst seam, papers and pens scattered, my planner already turning to mush. I crawled for my phone and found it under a parked car, screen smeared, still alive. The man rose in one smooth motion that did not match the impact we had taken. Up close, he smelled like cedar, and something darker, like smoke on skin. A thin scar cut his chin, and his eyes were the kind that learned things quickly. I wanted to yell at him for stepping out blind. Instead, I swallowed it and listened to the silence. At the edge of the intersection, a couple pedestrians stared and then hurried away, pretending they had not seen anything. A rideshare slowed, driver's face curious. Then the car rolled on. It was like everyone knew better than to linger around trouble. My phone buzzed again, Maya's name lighting the screen, and I could not bring myself to answer. I was still kneeling on wet asphalt with my wrist cradled, trying to decide if I should run home or call Nana Ruth first. The man watched me like he was weighing my next move. Then headlights turned the rain white. The lights belonged to a black SUV that should not have been there, sliding to the curb with the confidence of ownership. Before my mind could decide whether to be relieved or afraid, the man beside me shifted, posture tightening in a way that made me think of guard dogs. The SUV's windows were so dark they looked painted on. It idled without hesitation. Another engine answered behind it, then another, synchronized like a drill. I felt the hair rise on my arms. This was not rescue. This was retrieval. My feet moved backward on their own, toward a doorway. Doors opened, and men in black stepped out like they owned the rain. One had calm eyes and silver at his temples, a face built for control. He glanced at my wrist, then at the suited stranger with instant deference. I caught the word sir in his tone, and my stomach dropped. The stranger's hand closed around my elbow, steady, as if he could decide where I went next. I did not fight when they guided me into the SUV. No sirens, no police, no questions. The door shut. Outside, Philadelphia blurred, and my thoughts started breaking into fragments fast. Inside the SUV, heat hit my wet skin like a hand over my mouth. Leather, faint cologne, and the sterile bite of disinfectant mixed in the air. My wrist pulsed in time with the tires, and every bump sent a bright line of pain up my arm. I tried to memorize the route, but rain blurred the windows and my thoughts slid away. A partition rose between us and the driver, turning the world into a quiet box. I kept thinking of Ellie's backpack by the door, waiting. If I passed out, no one home would know where to look. The men spoke in low tones I couldn't catch, and that scared me more than shouting. My eyelids fluttered, heavy as soaked cloth. I remember a gate, the soft crunch of gravel, and an elevator that moved without a sound. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, too gentle for the kind of people who carried guns. Then the ceiling lights became a long white smear. When I came back, I was lying on a bed that felt too clean, under a gray quilt tucked tight like it expected obedience. The room smelled like soap and silence, not a hospital. I sat up too fast and the world tilted, slow and syrupy. My right wrist was wrapped in white bandage that climbed halfway to my elbow, neat as a promise. My knee stung beneath a square of gauze. Someone had cleaned me, changed me, and left me in soft sweatpants that weren't mine. A lamp glowed in a corner, the shade angled like it was watching. A digital clock read 3:17 in the morning. My phone wasn't on the nightstand, and my chest tightened hard. I listened for nurses, carts, anything normal, and heard only ventilation and my pulse. A door opened with a soft click, and an older man stepped in as if he belonged to quiet places. Wire-rimmed glasses, steady hands, a face that had learned not to look surprised. He checked my pupils with a penlight, pressed gentle fingers along my wrist, and nodded to himself. The words sprain and adrenaline crash floated into my brain like labels on file folders. He moved efficiently, never raising his voice, never asking for consent the way hospitals do. I answered questions he didn't speak, because my fear was louder than his silence. All I could think was Ellie. After the doctor left, another man took his place near the door, standing like a hinge. He was tall, broad, and calm, in a way that felt practiced, not natural. An earpiece sat in his right ear, barely visible. He didn't stare, but I felt his attention sweep the room, corners first, then me. A second later, my phone appeared on the dresser beside my bag, placed carefully as if it were evidence. No clipboard, no nurse station, no chaotic hallway, just a private room, a private guard, and rules I hadn't been told. Later I learned his name, Caleb. I snatched the phone with my good hand and saw the screen stacked with missed calls. Nana Ruth again, then Maya, then Nana Ruth a third time. My throat closed like I'd swallowed a stone. I dialed Nana Ruth first and forced air into my lungs until my voice sounded steady. I told her I'd been in an accident, that I was safe, that Ellie should stay in bed and not worry. It was half truth and half prayer. When Maya's name flashed next, I texted something vague, because I couldn't risk her asking questions out loud tonight. My hands were shaking so hard the phone rattled against my bandage. Caleb watched without comment, like he'd seen panic 1,000 times and knew it burned itself out. I kept waiting for the normal chain of events. An officer, a statement, a form I didn't read, a ride home. None of that arrived. No sirens outside the window. No fluorescent hallway noise. No hospital smell of bleach and fear. This place was clean and quiet and entirely controlled, which meant someone had decided what story would be told about me before I woke up, and I hated my relief. The door opened again, and the room changed before I even turned my head. He walked in without hurry, as if time bent around him. Dominic Marlowe, I would learn later, but in that moment he was simply the man from the street, now dry and composed, eyes darker in the lamplight. He looked at my wrist, my knee, my face, and I felt catalogued, not in a cruel way, more like a banker counting cash. Gratitude flared in me, followed by suspicion. Nobody powerful receives a debt and lets it sit unpaid. His attention rested on me, heavy, alone. Caleb moved at a glance from Dom, crossing to a cabinet built into the wall. He returned with a tablet and placed it in Dom's hand, then stepped back to his hinge position. Dom watched me for a beat, as if measuring whether I could handle what he was about to show. I told myself I could, because I had already felt the truck's wind on my face. The screen lit with grainy security footage of the intersection. I saw myself run, shove, fall. Seeing my body move without permission made my stomach roll. He rewound it, and I froze. Frame by frame, the driver's face flashed on screen, sharp enough to haunt me. He wasn't startled or confused. His eyes were fixed on Dom with intention, like he'd been told who to hit. The truck didn't drift past us. It corrected, a precise twitch toward where we fell, as if missing by inches was too generous. My skin went cold. I understood why there had been no police, no sirens, no paperwork. Someone was editing tonight into an accident. If they could edit that, they could erase a witness. Ellie was out there. I needed control before dawn came. Bravery felt different once I had Ellie. When I was alone, danger was my own problem, my own bruise, my own mistake. As a mother, risk became a bill my daughter might pay later. Watching the footage, I understood the truck was meant to kill him, and I was visible. Dom did not plead or explain. He presented protection the way people like him present weather, as fact. I forced myself to sit straight, even while my wrist throbbed. I set conditions in my head and then out loud without quoting. Time limited, laptop returned, and contact with Nana Ruth. Caleb watched my face as if he could see each calculation. There was no police report for me to sign, no hospital bracelet, no paperwork trail. They could move faster than the city, but I could disappear just as easily. I needed my apartment back immediately before the sun rose. The ride back felt quieter than the drive in. Philadelphia was dark, streets rinsed clean by rain. I sat between leather and glass, trying to listen for normal life. Caleb and another guard rode ahead. I kept thinking about Ellie's hair, damp after bath time, and Nana Ruth's pills waiting. My building looked smaller under the streetlight, like it had been shrinking for years, and I noticed. The front door lock was old, the hallway camera broken, the stairwell smelling of detergent and fear. 2 men flanked me up the stairs. Neighbors' doors stayed shut as if trouble was contagious. Inside the kitchen, light was on. Soft and Nana Ruth sat at the table with her pill organizer open, reading glasses low on her nose. Ellie was curled on the couch, one sock missing, rabbit tucked under her chin. Relief hit first, then guilt, sharp enough to make me swallow. Nana Ruth touched my cheek with a hand that had raised children and buried secrets. She did not ask questions. She studied my bandage and understood enough. I carried Ellie to her bed, breathing in shampoo and warm blankets. I promised myself strangers would never enter her room again here. Caleb waited by the door while I moved through my apartment like it was evidence. The message was clear. Dom expected me back soon. I accepted that, but on my terms. Nana Ruth would keep Ellie close, and I would not agree to anything that left my family unprotected today. I packed fast, not pretty. Laptop, charger, reference notebook, 2 sweaters, jeans, toiletries. Ellie's rabbit came too because comfort is not negotiable. Nana Ruth gathered her medications and blood pressure cuff. I opened my laptop just long enough to email clients about a family emergency and promise remote delivery soon. While the cursor blinked, I saw weaknesses everywhere. Ellie's fire escape stopped short of the ground. The deadbolt felt thin, the peephole scratched, the hallway light unreliable. I had called this place safe because it was familiar. Now it felt like paper, ready to tear the moment someone pulled hard. At the curb, dawn was a rumor. Caleb's SUV waited with the engine running. I paused long enough to smooth Ellie's blanket and leave a note. Nana Ruth hugged me once, fierce and quiet. I walked out with one bag and a bandaged wrist, feeling every window as an eye. The SUV pulled away, and my apartment receded like a photograph left in rain. I watched the block pass, memorizing cars and anything that looked wrong. My wrist ached every turn. Caleb sat beside the driver, silent. I imagined Ellie waking and calling my name into a room without me. Back in the building, Caleb guided me through silent halls. No one asked for my name. No one offered forms. They moved me like a package. I laid out what I needed, and I watched Dom's face for resistance. He listened like a man deciding whether my boundary was real. He agreed to a window, and Caleb arranged an escort that felt excessive for chargers and clothes. 2 vehicles, guards, as if my block was territory. Dom did not touch me, yet gravity shaped the plan. I reminded myself not to confuse attention with safety when Ellie was the stake. My phone buzzed with Maya's worry. I sent a message, the kind that keeps friendships breathing while poisoning trust. My hands shook as I typed. I knew my voice would sound calm if I called, because mothers learn that trick for children. Tonight I was using it on my friend. As we turned out of my street, I noticed a sedan parked under a tree, engine off, dark. It had been there when we arrived, and I had ignored it because pain makes you selfish. The car sat too still for morning. I stared at windshield and felt watched back. I leaned, trying to catch Caleb's eyes in the mirror. He followed my gaze without turning his head, then made a small motion, like a question. The other SUV shifted, blocking the sedan from view. My stomach sank. If it were theirs, they would not hide it from me ever. Caleb finally looked back, expression flat, and I understood. The sedan was not theirs. It belonged to whoever had aimed a truck at a red light. My address was known. Ellie's window faced the street. Rage rose in me, hot and clean, because someone had decided my child was collateral. My pride stopped mattering. Freedom could wait. Ellie could not. I pictured Nana Ruth's steady hands and Ellie's rabbit under her chin. The only responsible move was accepting the fortress Dom offered, not as gratitude or romance, but as shelter. If safety came with rules, I would learn them fast. We merged onto the highway, and Philadelphia fell behind us. My phone sat heavy with unanswered calls and half-truths. I stared at my bandaged wrist. Somewhere ahead, Dom's estate waited, built for survival. I told myself I was not being taken. I was choosing, because Ellie needed me alive. By the time the convoy left the city limits, the sky was thinning from black to bruised purple. Caleb's SUV led, and the second vehicle carried Nana, Ruth, and Ellie, close enough that I could see Ellie's silhouette when headlights swept the back window. I kept expecting to wake up in my own bed and find the last 12 hours were a stress dream. Instead, Philadelphia peeled away behind us, block by block, like someone was ripping pages from my life. My wrist ached with every mile, but my fear stayed sharp, watchful. I counted breaths, promising I would hold. The road narrowed into wooded darkness, then opened onto iron gates set into stone walls. Cameras perched on pillars like glossy insects, and floodlights painted the trees in hard white. The gates swung inward before we fully stopped, as if the property recognized our license plates and swallowed us whole. A guardhouse sat off to the side, staffed but silent, men moving with clipped gestures instead of conversation. As we rolled up the drive, I noticed patrol patterns. Pairs walking, spacing measured, hands near radios. This was not a home. It was a perimeter. Even gravel sounded trained under tires. Inside, the main house rose in warm stone and glass, tasteful enough for a magazine, intimidating enough to quiet my lungs. We were guided through a side entrance, away from the dramatic front doors, and down corridors that smelled faintly of lemon oil. My suite was bigger than my entire apartment. A king bed, a sitting area, a desk facing gardens I could not reach without escort. The windows looked thick, sealed tight, and when I tested a latch, it did not budge. Luxury, I realized, could be another kind of lock. The quiet pressed in like walls at night. Nana Ruth arrived minutes later with Ellie, both wrapped in borrowed hoodies that looked too expensive for our life. Ellie's eyes widened at the space, then narrowed the way they did when she decided to turn fear into a game. Nana set her pill organizer on the dresser with the same care she used at home, as if repetition could protect us. I unpacked like I was checking into a hotel. Pajamas folded, toothbrushes lined up, laptop placed on the desk, charger plugged in. My fingers kept moving because stopping meant thinking. Outside boots paced the terrace in steady loops. Ellie found the security cameras before she found the bathroom. She counted them under her breath, then asked Nana to count too, like it was a scavenger hunt. Nana played along, but when Ellie looked away, Nana's gaze met mine with a warning I felt in my ribs. She wasn't frightened of the men. She was frightened of what we were becoming around them. At home, my biggest enemy was overdue rent. Here, my enemy could be invisible. I knelt by Ellie, smoothing her hair, and tasted the iron of helplessness. I promised myself she would remember comfort, not panic. Work was the only thing I could control, so I clung to it with both hands, even the injured one. I opened my inbox, sent updates, and pretended my clients couldn't hear the guarded estate behind my typing. I wrote careful lines about a family emergency and remote access, keeping the truth buried under professionalism. Nana made tea in the kitchenette, humming softly, a sound that belonged in our small kitchen, not here. Ellie built a fort out of pillows and called it the safe castle. I laughed once, then swallowed the sound. Somewhere downstairs, radios chirped, then went silent. That evening, a staff member escorted me to dinner through corridors that never echoed, as if the house absorbed noise on purpose. Dom was already at the table, posture relaxed but not loose, his left arm moving with a careful economy that hinted at bruises under his shirt. He watched me sit, then watched me eat. Not predatory, more like he was listening to what my silence said. Everyone who entered the room adjusted their pace around him. I tried to focus on the food, but my mind kept circling the same question. What did he want from me now? The introductions happened in a blur of suits and polite smiles that never reached eyes. Gavin Marlowe arrived late and filled the space with practiced charm, the kind that makes strangers lean closer before they realize they are being measured. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience someone had set on the table. Peter Lang sat farther down, hands fidgeting with his napkin, adjusting his glasses too often, sweating lightly despite the climate control. When Gavin spoke, Peter's shoulders tightened. Caleb stood near the wall, watching everyone, including me, as if we were all potential leaks. Tonight alone. Back in my suite afterward, I stood at the sealed window and watched floodlights cut the gardens into bright rectangles. Men moved along the paths at timed intervals, predictable in a way that should have been comforting. Instead, it made my skin itch. The calm here wasn't natural. It was engineered, rehearsed, maintained by force. The house looked elegant, but it behaved like a bunker. Ellie fell asleep quickly, exhausted by newness, and Nana sat beside her, knitting as if needles could stitch the world back together. I opened a contract file, but every line felt like a warning anyway. Near midnight, Caleb knocked softly and stepped inside with the careful urgency people use when they don't want to wake a child. He didn't need to explain his face. He carried bad news like weight. A bomb had been planted in Dom's primary vehicle, wired to ignite when the engine turned. Dom had switched cars at the last moment, an instinct that saved him and the men around him. There was no outsider guessing. Someone close knew his schedule. As Caleb left, my mind returned to spreadsheets and inconsistencies. Hiding wasn't enough. I might be useful, and it mattered here. Days at the estate blurred into a loop of coffee, email, and listening. I woke before dawn because my body refused to trust silence. The sealed windows held the cold outside, but they also held me in, and I kept catching myself staring at the glass as if it might open out of pity. I worked at the desk with my wrist wrapped, translating clauses and polishing sentences while guards paced the garden paths below. Every time a radio clicked, my shoulders jumped. Normal life had become something I performed for Ellie, like brushing hair and smiling through fear. Ellie adapted the way kids do, fast and sideways. She turned the cameras into a counting game and drew maps of hallways on hotel stationery, adding little stick figures with earpieces. Once she asked why the men never laughed, and I told her they were working hard, then hated the lie even as it left my mouth. Nana Ruth kept her own routine like a lighthouse. Tea at sunrise, pills arranged by day, a short walk only when an escort hovered nearby. She never said the word danger, but her eyes followed every shadow. Dom's house ran on signals. Doors opened before anyone knocked. Meals appeared without questions, and I could feel invisible lines that I was not meant to cross. Caleb and his people spoke with their hands, a glance, a tilt of a chin toward a corner camera. Even the staff moved like they had practiced silence in a mirror. I noticed how everyone waited a fraction of a second for Dom, even when he was not in the room, as if his presence had trained the air. On the third evening after the bomb news, the house felt tighter, like someone had pulled a drawstring. I was rereading a client contract when I heard fast footsteps and a door shut with enough force to rattle the art on my wall. Minutes later, Dom entered my suite without the usual pause, and I saw a shallow cut along his cheekbone and fresh scrapes across his knuckles. He carried his anger like a jacket he refused to hang up. I grabbed the small first aid kit Caleb had left, cleaned the blood away, and pressed gauze where skin had split. Dom sat still, watching me work, breathing controlled, but his jaw kept flexing. In that quiet space, I felt the heat of him, the weight of everything unspoken, and the risky comfort of being allowed this close. Later, when I washed my hands, I noticed they were shaking again, not from fear of the cut, but from how quickly I had stepped into a role that felt intimate. I was not his nurse, not his partner, not anything official, yet my touch had soothed him. That realization scared me more than the guards. I thought of Ellie asleep down the hall, and reminded myself that closeness could become leverage in the wrong hands. Still, when Dom left, the room felt colder, and I hated how much that mattered. Before I could return to my emails, Caleb appeared with a folder and a tablet, his calm stretched thin. He laid out bank transfers, vendor invoices, and a spreadsheet of numbers that made my head ache. Even without knowing their business, I recognized the shape of trouble. Money moving in neat lines that did not match the story the labels told. Caleb's eyes kept flicking to the door, as if the walls could listen. I asked to see everything, because curiosity was no longer a hobby. It was survival. I spread the pages on my desk the way I spread bilingual contracts, hunting for the one detail that betrayed the whole. At first, the invoices looked clean, almost too clean, with polite descriptions and standard formatting. Then the small fractures appeared. One vendor used LLC, another used LLC with spaces. A third wrote Limited Liability Company in full, as if different hands were copying a template. Dates flipped between month first and day first. A payment memo said for rendering of provided services, a phrase that was correct but unnatural, like someone translating English back into English. The punctuation wandered. The same address appeared with two spellings. Those were not mistakes accountants made by accident. Those were tells. I followed the trail across the spreadsheet, linking each vendor name to a bank routing number, then to another payment, then another. The amounts were structured to look routine, small enough to avoid alarm, frequent enough to add up. Whoever built this knew internal approval steps and knew how to hide behind normal language. I could almost see the person at a desk, tightening every sentence until it sounded official. But the inconsistency gave them away, the same way a forged signature betrays itself with one wrong stroke. This was a network of shells, and someone inside had opened the door. Caleb watched my finger land on the same cluster of vendor codes again and again, and the room shifted. I felt it in the silence, in the way he stopped treating my analysis as a favor and started treating it as intelligence. When Dom returned, he stood behind my chair, close enough that I could feel warmth through my sweater. I showed him the pattern without bravado, just the facts, and his stillness tightened. His attention pinned to me with something like respect, and something like possession, too quiet to name. In that moment, I understood I had stepped out of the guest wing and into the center of his problem. That should have made me proud. Instead, it made my stomach twist, because assets get protected, and they also get used. If this money trail led to someone powerful, my handwriting on these pages was now a threat. I thought of Ellie's maps and Nana's steady hands and promised myself I would not be brave for sport. I would be brave with purpose, and I would demand terms from now. After I flagged the fake vendors, the estate stopped pretending to be a retreat. Men moved faster, radios chirped more often, doors opened before I reached them. I kept working anyway, because deadlines felt like railings on a staircase. My wrist healed into a dull ache, but my nerves stayed raw. I slept in short stretches and woke to the sound of boots on gravel outside the sealed window. Each morning I checked Ellie first, then Nana Ruth, then my inbox, as if that order could keep the world stable. By noon I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The staff began treating me differently. Not warmer, just more careful. A maid lingered near my desk as if checking what I could see. Caleb started asking where I planned to sit, where Ellie would play, what time Nana Ruth liked her walks. It sounded polite, but I heard the subtext. My patterns mattered now. I had become a variable. Some people nodded at me with respect, others with something sharper, like I had stepped into a room I did not earn. I wondered who inside this house benefited from my silence, and how before someone tried to erase me. Dom's attention shifted from courtesy to focus. When he entered a room, conversations thinned out, like everyone was saving oxygen for him. With me, he asked fewer questions and watched more, waiting for my mind to land on the same detail twice. It steadied me, knowing he believed my instincts, but it also scared me, because belief creates expectation. I caught him studying Ellie from the doorway once, not with softness, but with calculation, as if he was measuring the size of the threat around her. I hated that I understood. It meant he fought, and someone would aim harder. Nana Ruth tried to keep the house human. She taught Ellie a card game at the breakfast table, and insisted on folding laundry herself, even when staff offered. I watched her hands, steady despite age, and felt ashamed for needing guards to walk to a garden. Ellie asked if we were living in a museum, because nothing here looked touched. I told her it was temporary, then looked away so she would not see the lie settle on my face. The guilt sat heavier than my bandage. What does safety cost, and who pays it? I feared it was Ellie. Maya's calls stacked up like unopened bills. I let them ring, then typed careful messages that sounded casual and meant nothing. Each lie widened the gap between who I was and who I pretended to be. That night, Dom found me on the balcony, staring at the floodlit lawn. He did not touch my bandage or ask for thanks. He stood close enough that our breaths shared the same cold air, and I let the closeness happen. For a moment, I leaned into his warmth and felt chosen. Then I remembered leverage. In his world, affection could become a weapon. The next day, Peter Lang appeared in the hallway outside Dom's office, and his body looked like it was trying to leave without him. His hands fluttered at his pockets. His eyes flicked to cameras, then to Caleb, then away. When he spoke to anyone, his mouth moved too fast, as if explanation could outrun suspicion. I recognized the pattern from frightened clients and panicked coworkers. Someone was squeezing him, tightening the rope a little each hour. Fear has a grammar. It repeats. It overcorrects. Watching Peter, I knew he was not the architect. He was the door they used. Caleb's team dug through the paper walls I had pointed out, and the story grew uglier by the hour. The vendors led to addresses that were only mailboxes, then to companies registered in Delaware under names that sounded random, then to trusts that hid behind offshore intermediaries. It was like chasing smoke through mirrors. Yet each layer required someone with internal access to approve it, and each approval left a fingerprint. Caleb told me they were narrowing the circle to the top. When he said Gavin Marlowe's name, my stomach dropped. Family betrayal feels colder than enemy fire every time. I started noticing small shifts in how men looked at me after that. Gavin still smiled at dinner, but his eyes slid past me like I was a stain on glass. A captain I did not know paused when I entered a corridor, then watched Dom, as if checking whether he would choose me over protocol. Dom never corrected them in public, but his hand hovered near my back when we walked. A claim. That protection comforted me, and it also painted a target. If Ellie hears my fear, does she learn fear too? I kept swallowing panic with coffee. Near dusk, Caleb asked me to come to Dom's study again, and I could tell from his pace that something had clicked into place. The house felt different on the way there. Corridors busier, guards posted in pairs, staff avoiding eye contact. Dom waited at the desk with his sleeves rolled, skin pale under lamplight, calm sharpened into something metallic. Papers covered the surface like fallen leaves. Caleb set a fresh stack beside my earlier notes, and my stomach tightened before I read a single line. What else were they hiding behind polite formatting? I felt the storm leaning closer. The new documents connected my vendor list to something worse. The same shell accounts paid a trucking company deposit, wired the driver's fee, and moved money to a supplier of explosive components for Dom's garage. Dom's own revenue had financed the red light, the bomb, the fear in Ellie's eyes. Caleb stayed even, but anger rippled through the room like heat. Dom did not move. When he finally inhaled, the air seemed to shrink around him. I understood then. We were not hunting an outsider. We were bleeding from within, and the next night would not stay quiet at all. By late evening, the estate felt like a held breath. Patrols doubled, then doubled again, and the men who usually nodded at me stopped doing even that. Boots crossed the hallway outside my suite in measured loops, and every radio click made Ellie glance up from her coloring book. Nana Ruth kept her knitting in her lap, needles still, listening. I tried to work, but my eyes kept tracking reflections in the sealed window, searching for movement in the garden lights. If this fortress could be breached, what was safety really, and who decided it? Tonight, I was to learn. Downstairs, Dom called his inner circle together. I was not invited, but sound travels in quiet houses, and tension travels faster. Through the stairwell I caught fragments. Names, numbers, and the sharp pause that followed mine. I did not hear full sentences, yet I felt the accusation forming, shaped by Gavin's smooth confidence and the way others shifted their weight when he spoke. I had become the explanation for Dom's distractions, the convenient weakness in a story about leadership. Who benefited from blaming me? I hugged my arms tighter and waited. Above, Ellie slept, and I counted her breaths again. When I checked on Ellie, her rabbit was wedged under her chin, and her lashes trembled, as if she dreamed in short bursts too. Nana Ruth sat in the armchair beside the bed, pretending to read while watching the door. She did not ask questions. She only gave me that look that meant, "Stay steady, child." I swallowed shame, because my fear would teach Ellie what to expect from the world. I promised myself she would remember me calm, even if my heart was sprinting. Then a dull thud shook the house. A second later, the alarm stuttered and died. For one stretched beat, nothing happened, and that was worse than noise. The lights did not cut out, but the normal hum changed, as if power rerouted. Somewhere below, glass shattered, a sharp crash that made my skin tighten. Footsteps pounded, too many, moving with purpose, and I heard muffled voices from men I did not recognize. The estate's calm snapped into chaos like a rope breaking. I ran barefoot into the hallway, wrist aching, and saw guards sprint past with weapons drawn. My only thought was Ellie, always Ellie. Nana Ruth appeared behind me, steady, holding my elbow hard. Dom emerged from the stairwell like he had been built for this exact moment. The softness I'd glimpsed at dinner vanished. In its place was a cold efficiency that made men obey without hesitation. He did not shout. He pointed, nodded, and the house rearranged itself around his decisions. Caleb materialized beside him, face streaked with rain and dust, already scanning. I watched Dom's gaze sweep corridors, counting threats, then land on me for half a second, as if checking I was still real. I hated that it steadied me. I hated it more that it felt like belonging there. Caleb moved first, guiding Nana Ruth and me toward the service hall, the part of the house meant for invisibility. He kept one hand near my back without touching, steering by presence alone. We passed a panel that looked like wall art until it swung open, revealing a narrow passage lit by emergency strips. Ellie's door was ahead, and my breath came shallow as I crossed to her bed. I lifted her, warm and confused, and pressed her rabbit into her arms so she had something familiar. She clung to me, silent, sensing the rule. No questions now. We ran. The safe room hid behind a false wine rack, steel and concrete dressed up as luxury. Caleb keyed a code, pushed us inside, and sealed the door with a heavy sigh that cut off the world. Emergency lights washed everything pale. A small monitor showed hallway feeds, but I could not watch. I could only listen to Ellie's breathing against my chest. Nana Ruth sat on the bench, shoulders square, hands folded. My lungs burned, and my mind ran wild anyway. If this house could be breached, what was safety? I swallowed panic for her and waited for the noise. Minutes stretched until they stopped meaning anything. The sounds outside rose and fell. A thump, a rush of feet, then silence like someone holding a pillow over the house. Caleb watched the monitor, jaw tight, earpiece crackling with updates he did not repeat. When his tablet chimed, he swore under his breath, the first crack in his calm I'd seen. He showed Dom a file, then looked at me with something like apology. The security override had come from inside, using Peter Lang's credentials, time-stamped before the breach. It was not an invasion. It was a door opened on purpose. When the door finally unsealed, the hallway smelled of smoke and wet stone, and men moved in tight formation, already sweeping, already erasing. Dom stepped out first, eyes flat, shirt rumpled, as if the chaos had been a meeting he finished. I followed, still carrying Ellie. Guards guided us toward the study where Caleb spoke quietly to Dom, pointing at the monitor feed. Gavin Marlowe was nowhere in the house. His quarters were empty, bed untouched. Security records showing he had been escorted out early, safe. My throat tightened. Peter's credentials opened the gate, and Gavin vanished before the storm. That combination felt like a signature. By dawn, the estate looked almost normal again. Broken glass had been collected, scuff marks wiped, furniture repositioned, and the staff moved like nothing happened. The speed of cleanup chilled me, because it meant violence was routine here, handled like laundry. Ellie ate toast with eyes too serious for 7, and Nana Ruth kept her voice gentle, telling a story about storms passing. Dom vanished behind closed doors with Caleb, and guards avoided my gaze. I knew the night would not be solved by force alone. Someone inside opened the door. Peter Lang would have to explain soon, in full. Morning arrived without sunrise, just a gray wash over stone and glass. The estate breathed again, but it did it quietly, like a patient pretending nothing hurt. Men in black moved through hallways with carts and cloths, collecting shards, swapping rugs, wiping fingerprints off places hands had grabbed in panic. A broken vase vanished, replaced by another identical one, as if the house kept backups for violence. Radios stayed low, the fluorescent hum in service corridors the loudest sound. Watching them erase the night unsettled me more than the night itself. It made wonder how many storms were polished away. Upstairs, Ellie ate toast at the little table in my suite, rabbit tucked under one arm, eyes too serious for 7. Nana Ruth pretended it was an adventure, asking Ellie to help sort the tiny travel shampoo bottles like they were treasures. I matched their tone, even while my stomach stayed tight. I kept thinking about my apartment window facing the street, the sedan that waited, and how I had brought my child into a battlefield she never chose. When Ellie reached for my bandaged wrist, I smiled and told myself, calm is something you gift your kids every day. Caleb came for me mid-morning, not rushing, but carrying urgency in the set of his shoulders. He led me through a back corridor that smelled of bleach and coffee, past a door I had never noticed, into a room lit too bright. Dom stood at the far end, hands braced on a table, still as a statue. Paperwork lay spread out like a map of sins. Caleb pointed to timestamps, access logs, and a single name that kept repeating, Peter Lang. The override used his credentials. The gate had opened because someone inside turned the lock for them quietly. Peter arrived escorted, looking smaller than his suits had ever made him seem. His hair was damp with sweat, his hands trembling so hard he could not keep them on the tabletop. He kept glancing at the corner camera as if it might judge him. I recognized the look from people caught between shame and fear, the moment when denial collapses. The room felt cold, the fluorescent buzz sharp in my ears. Peter's mouth worked without sound for a beat, and then the truth spilled out in uneven pieces, like he had been holding his breath for months on end. Peter admitted he had started with something almost pathetic: gambling debt, a few hidden transfers he swore he meant to repay. Gavin found the records and turned them into a leash. At first, Peter only created vendor accounts and approved payments, telling himself it was bookkeeping, not betrayal. Then the requests grew sharper. He routed money through shells, signed off on invoices he knew were fake, and watched totals climb. When Dom survived the truck, Gavin demanded access codes as insurance. Peter convinced himself no one would get hurt. The breach proved how wrong that lie was to everyone involved. Dom listened without interrupting, and that was the worst part. His face stayed calm, but the calm had edges, the kind of stillness that warns you the storm is choosing where to land. Caleb watched Peter like a door that might swing open again. I felt relief at finally seeing the shape of the betrayal, then dread at what Dom's world did with traitors, even weak ones. No one raised a voice. Dom's silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. When Peter finally stopped talking, the air felt heavier, as if truth had its own gravity inside this room. After Peter was taken away, Dom and Caleb reviewed what they had, stacking evidence like bricks. I could feel the problem underneath. Half the organization would believe the story they wanted, not the story on paper. Calling Gavin a traitor without spectacle would split them, and a split would become war. My work brain, the one trained to anticipate objections, started building the next argument. Gavin had tried and failed to kill Dom twice. Now his window was closing. He would move fast, reckless with confidence, because cornered men hate waiting and make mistakes when they think time is theirs. I also understood Gavin's most useful lie was about me. He had been planting it in every room. Dom was distracted. Dom was compromised. Dom was choosing an outsider over tradition. That lie was poison, but it was also a trail. If Gavin believed I was the lever that could move Dom, he would reach for me again. I thought about the sedan near my apartment, the cameras that caught my face, and the fact that I could not unjoin this story. The question became how to force Gavin into daylight, where everyone could see his hands before he vanished. The plan arrived in my mind with the simplicity of a bad dream. I offered myself as the bait, not as sacrifice, but as controlled exposure, a staged relocation to a secondary safe house, visible enough to tempt watchers, guarded enough to survive. I said Ellie stayed here, with Nana Ruth, under the tightest protection. No exceptions. Dom's stare sharpened, and the room chilled. He carried fear like anger, and I could feel him rejecting the idea on instinct. Caleb's expression shifted into calculation, because he lived in odds, not wishes. I reminded them I was already hunted, already marked. I did not beg. I explained. The way I explained risk to clients, that proof mattered more than suspicion. Gavin would deny paperwork, spin stories, claim innocence, but he could not deny reaching for the weakness he invented. Caleb began outlining surveillance angles, response times, contingencies, his voice calm even when not quoted. Dom paced once, then stopped, as if choosing between two terrible options. When he finally nodded, it was not permission, it was acceptance of math. I left the study with my stomach tight and a vow. Ellie stays off the board. Tomorrow, we would build the trap. By noon, the estate had stopped smelling like smoke, but my body still carried the night in small flinches. Caleb's people walked with clipboards and quiet radios, building the next move while I watched Ellie line up crayons in perfect rows. I told Dom and Caleb the same rule again, because rules only work when repeated. Ellie stays here, with Nana Ruth, with guards who never blink. No rehearsals, no exceptions, no quick visits to make the story believable. If my fear had to be used, it would be mine alone. I signed that promise in my head hard today. Planning felt like laying wires across my own skin. They chose a secondary property Dom already owned, close enough for a fast response, distant enough to look like desperation. Caleb mapped cameras, entry points, and blind corners, then asked me to act normal in the very places fear would show. The plan depended on watchers seeing less security than usual, so my convoy shrank to 2 vehicles, not 5. I would carry my laptop, wear an ordinary coat, and step out like a woman trying to pretend she was safe. I hated how much the lie resembled my old life. Before we left, I kissed Ellie's forehead and memorized the weight of her in my arms because I could not take her with me and I needed something real to hold. Nana Ruth braided Ellie's hair and kept her voice light, but her eyes followed every guard who passed the doorway. The SUVs rolled out mid-afternoon, discreet, almost boring, which was the point. Philadelphia slid by in gray streaks, and I kept my face turned toward the window, giving anyone tailing us a look. Being bait meant being visible. It felt like walking under a spotlight I could not dim. The safe house sat along the river, all glass and steel and expensive emptiness. From outside it looked exposed, a modern box with too many windows, the kind of place you could photograph from the sidewalk. Inside, the beauty was a costume, reinforced panels hid behind drywall, cameras hid in smoke detectors, and the second-floor study where I waited had walls thick enough to swallow sound. A bookshelf swung outward to reveal a narrow panic room lined in gray metal, stocked with water and a monitor. Caleb's command team stayed nearby, close enough that help could arrive in seconds. My job was to be seen. I opened my laptop at the desk closest to the window, typed edits, and walked past the glass every few minutes like a restless person who could not focus. Each time I crossed that line of sight, I wondered how many eyes were on me from parked cars or upper floors across the street. The earpiece in my ear felt like a thread tied to Caleb's hand, steadying me when my breath turned shallow. I forced myself to drink water, to blink, to look ordinary. Fear was real, but it had to look manageable. Near dusk, the first sound was not a shout but a soft pop, like a tool cutting a lock. Then the front glass downstairs shattered inward, and footsteps poured through the house with practiced spacing. I stayed where Caleb told me to stay, shoulders pinned, hands flat on the desk so I would not fidget. A voice called my name from below, calm and rehearsed, and my stomach lurched. I did not answer. I listened to doors opening, cabinets checked, rooms cleared, time slowed into slices. I counted Ellie's breaths in memory and let that rhythm keep me still tonight. The men reached the stairwell just as the house answered back. A burst of light flashed in the hallway, followed by footsteps that moved with certainty, not searching. Caleb's guidance in my ear stayed even, steering me to the bookshelf. 2 guards appeared and pulled me into the hidden room, sealing it with a metal click. On the monitor, I watched intruders drop weapons and raise hands as Dom's people flooded every entrance. No gunfire, no screaming, only quick commands and restraints. The safe house stopped looking pretty and started looking prepared. I exhaled for the first time in minutes. After the all clear, the panic room door opened, and air rushed in, carrying damp and the smell of broken glass. Caleb met me in the study with eyes that looked tired. He led me downstairs past panels being taped and covered, like the house was ashamed. Men in zip ties sat against the wall, watched by guards who treated restraint like a skill. Outside, headlights idled beside a stopped SUV. Caleb told me Dom's team had intercepted Gavin's vehicle 3 blocks away, before he could circle closer. Gavin had come for me. That truth tasted like cold metal alone. On the way out, I passed the captives and saw their faces, trained and blank, as if emotion was optional. Caleb's people photographed pockets and the contents of every phone, not for cruelty, but for proof. I rode back in the SUV with my hands folded, feeling my heartbeat shake my bones. The earpiece was gone, yet I still heard Caleb's calm in my head. Halfway to the estate, he showed Dom what they found. Messages from a number registered to Gavin, instructions timed to my arrival, and a map pin of the safe house. Proof, not rumor at last. When we reached the gates, adrenaline cooled into a tremor I could not hide. The estate looked calm, but I knew calm here was rebuilt, not trusted. Ellie ran to me and I held her tight, then passed her to Nana Ruth and forced a smile. Dom stayed close without touching, already shifting into the posture he used for captains. Caleb signaled that the council would convene before night, because proof only mattered if it was seen. My stomach sank. I had survived being bait. Now I had to face men in suits and make the truth louder than Gavin. By the time we returned from the river house, my hands would not stop shaking. The estate buzzed like a hornet nest under polite lighting, guards rotating, phones ringing, doors closing softly but often. Ellie clung to Nana Ruth on the sofa, quiet in a way that made my throat ache. Dom did not touch me, not even a steadying hand, because tonight was not about comfort. Tonight was about witness. Caleb guided me down to the conference wing, and with every step I felt the air thicken, as if the house itself was holding court over my borrowed heartbeat. The council room looked like a boardroom designed by someone who had read too many war histories. A long table, leather chairs, screens mounted on the walls, and men in dark suits spaced like chess pieces. No one smiled. Some watched Dom with loyalty, others with calculation, and all of them watched me like a test. Caleb placed me behind a one-way panel at first, but Dom's glance pulled me forward into the light. Then Gavin entered under guard, still wearing confidence like cologne, eyes bright with the belief that words could outrun facts even when it stayed silent. Dom began with what the numbers could not hide. On the screens, vendor names marched in neat columns, each payment approved, each description polished, each company one I had already flagged as fake. Caleb layered the trail. Transfers through shell accounts, then wiring to a trucking company, then deposits tied to explosive components. The men around the table leaned in despite themselves. Peter Lang was brought in next, pale and small, and his cooperation landed like a stone. I watched captains' faces change as the story shifted from rumor to receipts. Still, I could feel doubt looking for oxygen there. Gavin used that oxygen the moment he could. He stood straighter, eyes sweeping the room, and turned every piece of evidence into a performance about leadership. I understood his message without needing his exact words. Dom had softened. Dom had brought an outsider inside the gates. Dom had risked tradition for sentiment. A few captains shifted, not toward Gavin, but away from uncertainty. Their hesitation stung because it carried truth I hated. I was a liability if I stayed silent. I was also the proof if I spoke. My knees wanted to fold, but motherhood kept my spine upright tonight. I walked to the table with my laptop and a folder Caleb had given me earlier, hands steady only because Ellie's face lived in my mind. I admitted, in the simplest way, that I was not from their world. Then I showed them why Gavin's betrayal was bigger than money and pride. Buried in the accounts were draft agreements with a rival cartel, offering shipping routes, port access, and internal schedules in exchange for backing his coup. The room changed instantly, because every man there understood that selling routes meant selling families. Even fence-sitters recoiled from that trade alone. The vote happened fast after that, hands rising one after another until unanimity filled the air like relief. Gavin's charm finally cracked, replaced by something raw and hateful, and then he was led away without ceremony. Dom addressed the room with the same calm he used on the street, but it carried a new hardness. He would not apologize for protecting me, and he would not tolerate anyone who tried to use me as a weapon against him. When the captains filed out, the room felt suddenly empty, like a storm had passed. I exhaled and tasted the first piece. A few days later, I met Maya for lunch at a quiet cafe inside the city. One Dom owned, but she did not know. Caleb's people sat at separate tables, pretending to scroll phones, and the normalcy felt staged. Maya's eyes searched my face the way she used to before finals, when she could tell I was lying. I told her the truth in pieces. A man I saved, danger that followed, choices I was making with open eyes. She was angry, then scared, then finally soft, and I promised to stay her friend even if my life looked unrecognizable. Back at the estate, Nana Ruth waited until Ellie was asleep to speak in the gentle way that still felt like a command. She reminded me that love without dignity becomes a cage, and that safety without autonomy is another kind of danger. I carried those words to Dom that night. I told him I could not live as a protected ornament, watched and moved like property. If he wanted me here, I needed a role, a voice, and the right to walk away if I ever chose. His silence lasted long enough to scare me, then eased with agreement. He offered structure instead of promises, sliding a folder across the desk that looked like any corporate proposal. Strategic compliance and negotiation, using my languages, my pattern detection, my habit of seeing the lie inside polite phrasing. The job description included authority to review major deals and veto anything suspicious. I read every line, because that is who I am. And then I added my conditions. I would keep some legitimate clients. I would set boundaries for Ellie's privacy, and I would have an exit clause that required no pleading. Dom accepted without bargaining, and I felt respected, not contained. Sometimes I think about that red light and the split second my body chose before my mind did. I did not choose violence, but I chose responsibility, and responsibility led me into a world where truth has to be proven with paper and courage. Ellie is still my compass, Nana Ruth my anchor, and Dom is the man I chose with eyes open, not trapped, not bought. I will never pretend it is simple. If one moment rewrote your life, tell me about it in the comments, and if you want more stories like mine, like and share this one.